Okay, so Light Live, fast pitch before we jump into what today is. Live game, reminder, digital only sort of premise, constantly patched, updated. Obviously, inspiration from games like Destiny, because Destiny is the inspiration for Light. It allows you to do cool things like dailies, weeklies, updated content, patches, things like that. That the second you go to print becomes really tricky to do. Um, and ideally, you create some sort of interesting, evolving, changing world slash game. Why we don't need to go into all that. I talked about that in the past. Then this is all like the initial brainstorm. Here's the last brainstorm that I did. With a big old note that I've given myself here, which is to remember that fragmenting is tricky. And what I mean by that is Light Live is supposed to be this new thing, but is it new as in like another thing that I release? Because then there's 3 different things out there for Light right now. There's like Light, the core experience, there's Light, the season pass, and then there would be Light Live. And once you start fragmenting it into so many pieces, that gets really annoying, right? Trying to figure out like what you own, what you don't own, what do you need, where can you find it. So fragmenting is tricky. It's a big old reminder to myself. So I did sorry, I had to check on my dog. She's completely passed out. Excellent. This is the Light Live plus season pass model, which is basically, what if I took this live RPG idea here and sewed it into the season pass? And I mapped out kind of what season 2 was. So if you didn't want to know what season 2 is about of Light, then hopefully you didn't watch that. Hopefully you weren't paying attention to the screen just now. Here is what I want to do today, which is live as raids, I guess is what I'm calling them right now. At least that's what I called them when I first did this brainstorm in the past. So live as raids, which is part of the core experience, which means it's not a new thing you have to go get. You don't have to go buy it as a separate thing. It's just in Light itself. The second you own Light, you have Live. And it would just be this thing that I would continuously do. It would just be like continual support on my end. And by continual support, I mean every month, the premise at least right now, the premise when I first came up with this idea, and this was inspired from a conversation that I had with Jeremy Gage. Jeremy runs the Draw Your Dice podcast. He's also working on a really fantastic game called Kaleidoscope. So Jeremy and I are really excited about this idea of a live game and what that means. And so Jeremy got me kind of started on this whole thing. I wrote down this like really frantic notebook here of notes as he was kind of coming up with these ideas. And then I sort of inspired based off of our conversation, thought about this idea of doing raids, right? Because raids are like the big thing that you do in any of these looter shooters or MMOs or things like that, right? It's like you're trying to make your characters more powerful so that you can eventually go do the big thing, the big challenging thing. And, similar with a lot of RPGs that we run, especially like you look at like traditional RPGs, it's all about building up more and more power, leveling up your characters until eventually you can go kill the big bad, right? Or something like that. So what if we just sort of expedited that process and iterated on it on a monthly schedule? At least that's how I've initially written it, as a monthly schedule. So you would get a prompt at the beginning of the month that says like, here's a big problem that's happening in the Light universe. Some big invasion, some disastrous thing, some anomaly that's shown up. Trouble has come. You would need to do like 3 to 4 strikes then throughout the month. And if you tie them together, the narrative experience of those strikes together, they encompass a raid. Because a raid is like raids are made of parts, right? They're not they're like separate. They're like a raid is a dungeon, right? A raid is just a dungeon, and so it's each room is its own thing that you have to deal with. It's a puzzle in this room, or it's hold off waves of enemies in this room, jumping thing, whatever you need to do in this room, solve that problem. So the strikes have already, I released Fuel earlier this month, and that gave us some substance on how to format strikes. And so if we can use that substance to tie together 3 to 4 strikes with a narrative line through them that ultimately leads up to like the last strike being like the true finale, the beating of the boss or whatever the raid conclusion is. It doesn't always have to be a boss, I don't think. And then that's it. That's that month. And we'll talk about why you would do this in the first place, other than it's fun. Hopefully the fun is a big part of it. Something to consider is that if I did this as just part of the core experience, like if you own Light, you can count on this thing happening, is that's work, right? That's work that I have to do every month in terms of coming up with a raid prompt, coming up with weekly prompts and stuff like that. This loot pool thing I'm going to talk about in a second. And so that probably means that Light is going to have to be made more expensive. It's going to have to be a price bump. Because right now it's $5 on itch, and you get like the core game and all the modules. That might need to go up if you're going to get like this monthly thing. So that's a big thing to consider with this like live as raids model, with it being a part of the core experience. Because otherwise you like fraction it out, and then it gets all tricky again if we like were to break this into like Light Live as raids, and so you can buy Light, you can buy the season pass, you can buy the raid pass. Like that's a nightmare. I don't feel like dealing with that, and people don't want to deal with that either, right? All right, here's the other basic premises of the raid thing before I do like some actual like work on this. Why you would do this, other than that it's fun and you have like a thing that your group could do on a weekly basis, is that you would have a loot pool. So at the start of the month, you would have a pool of loot that I generate for the raid. And it's all themed around the raid. So if like the first raid is all about like some sort of Corvus invasion, because the Corvus is my bird-themed equivalent of the Cabal, because I have to have crows in my games, then the idea is that like I would make a bunch of loot that's Corvus themed. And like, what is loot? Obviously it's guns, because it's a looter shooter inspired game, so it's going to be guns. But like trying to think of other things that would be loot that you could still get at the end of the strike that is interesting. You make a pool of it, and then you spread it out across the strikes, so that if you complete every strike that comes out every week as part of the raid, as you're progressing through the raid, you make it to the finale of that strike, you open up the chest at the end, and you get a fun, cool thing that you get because you did that part of the strike that week. Yeah, right? Like accessories or like transmog stuff. Like, how can I make like fashion into Light? I don't know. That'd be very fun to come up with. Of course, it's not something that you could really gamify, right? Like, I just want people to say what they have, but it would be neat to have a beacon with a cute dress. That's a great idea. And then the other like component of this loot pool thing is that if at the end of this you did all of the strikes, so let's say it's 4 strikes in a raid, each week you're getting like a new thing, and then if you finish the 4th strike, you get that week's loot. But if it's also like you did all of the components of the raid, you did all the strikes, you get this really badass extra thing at the end. Something that, like, again, and a huge thing to remember is that, like, I can't police this, and I don't want to, right? Like, there's a big part of it which is me making stuff that says, like, if you do this, if you finish the strike with these modifiers, then you can unlock this cool gun. And of course, you can just say, like, yeah, I did it. and then you can just have the gun if you want. It's just to try and, as best we can, recreate the live game experience in the format that is an RPG, which means it kind of, like, we end up getting a lot of getting hand wavy about a lot of stuff. One last thing to consider before we jump into all of this is that guests could do this then, right? Like, that would be the cool thing. If I wanted to take a month off or whatever, I could pay somebody to just make their own. Oh, that's real good. Oh, that's real good. Fashion could equal custom art commissions, avatars, or whatever. That's a brilliant idea. If I could get somebody who'd, like, want to do stuff like that, I need to write that down. Custom art commissions, avatars, etc. That's a good idea. That's really good. I like that a lot. Anyway, if I wanted to take a break, right? I do this for 3 months and I'm like, fuck, I'm like burned out. Let's bring on somebody else to do it. I know there's a bunch of folks who dig light already who might be interested in, like, taking on that month's raid, and I would pay them, obviously, right? Like, I pay them to do it, and then it's up to them. They come up with the prompt that's at the start of the month. They write the 3 to 4 strikes. They build up their own pool of loot, and they're responsible for, like, sending me the stuff, because I would probably still manage the itch page. But the cool thing then is the raids don't all have to come from me. Like, the raids could come from people who've got totally different preferences of what they like to see in their looter shooters and in their RPGs in general, right? Like, somebody might take it quite literally as a dungeon approach, and somebody else might take it as, like, what if the raid is just like this prolonged, like, scouting mission? And there's no big bad, but it's just like the legs of a long, arduous, dangerous scouting mission. Like, that could be really cool on its own, rather than, like, what we traditionally think of as a raid or a dungeon or something like that. I agree. There's got to be some artists out there that would be super into it. I think that's a really neat idea. Okay. That's the premise of what we're talking about. So light live, raid model. Not really Season 2 spoilers, because, again, the idea is that this is unconnected from the Season Pass. This would just be its own thing. It's only Season 2 spoilers in that, even though it's unconnected from the Season Pass, like, future raids would incorporate things from the Season Pass, right? So if Season Pass comes along, we've got a new enemy type that hits. Like, obviously, we're going to want that month's raid to be about that enemy type, even if it's not directly linked to the Season Pass itself. So, like, unconnected in that it's not like you have to own the Season Pass to get the raids, but connected in that it would the raids would eventually reflect the material that is in the Season Passes. Okay. How's that all feel so far? To me, that seems cool. It seems interesting. I'm looking back at, like, what I did with the Season Pass model and how I did this. So, like, let's just practice making a raid, right? Like, I think that's the thing to start. To see if this feels good, it's just to practice making one in the first place. And so let's just make a raid. It's not going to be fully fleshed out. We're not making all the strikes, but it gives us a sense of, like, maybe what core things would need to be made as part of a raid so that we know what it would be. So to make a raid, you need a premise, right? You need a premise, which is going to be something, right? Would a theme be a good start? A theme's a great start, MV. Do you have a theme in mind that you want to do? Because I'm all ears. Thinking. I like it. Think about it. I'm going to just look at my dog here. She's completely asleep right now. It's inspiring to me how calm she is. I mean, we need we need a premise, which means we need a enemy faction. Demand jumping puzzles. We'll just put that as a note. Jumping. I can't type today. Jumping puzzles are a must. Gotta have them. You gotta have them. Something like return. Ooh, okay, cool. So we need a theme. I like this idea of return. Ooh, I want some. Yeah, big orbs, right? It's Destiny inspired, so we need orbs. So I like this idea of return. Return is a fun word to play with. The question is what is it the return of? Is it the return of a return of allies that we didn't realize were still out there? Is it a return of an enemy threat that we had thought long since passed? Is it the return of opportunities that we had thought we had lost? What if return. What could return me? It could be a long thought abandoned. Oh my god, I can't. Abandoned research lab off on blank has woken up, right? We got a long since abandoned research lab somewhere off in the system woken up. We get a signal. What if each strike is a different return? So a new element of something coming back with each strike. That could be pretty cool. Trying to think about how to sew all of those different returns together. I like that idea though, right? I like having a theme. Having a one-word theme is real good too, because I just like one-word things. Light. All of the spark, fuel, kindle, all that stuff is just one word. I like that. Return is also enemy faction, long since thought destroyed. An ally of some kind has come back that we thought. Good morning, Brain Trust. Good morning. Good afternoon. Good evening, wherever you are. An ally of some kind has come back. Were they dead? Do they bring news? Grim tidings? Bad news, right? So we have the return of something. We want an enemy faction to be the thing. I think it's we want it to be focused. I don't want it to be necessarily this thing where you're planet hopping all over the place throughout the month and you're trying to weave together this story. I do like this premise of it being you are in this place dealing with this situation. It just happens to be being released on a weekly basis, but your beacons at the end of strike one are still in the place, still dealing with it. They're recovering or planning the next leg of the raid. Which means I don't want you jumping off to Mars to go fight the Corvus and then you're off to another place to go deal with a totally different faction. I'm not saying that that's a total thing. Something I don't ever want to do. I just think I want to do focus stuff, at least at the beginning, because I have no idea if this is going to work in the first place. So let's pick an enemy faction. Let's pick an enemy faction. All right, here are our options. Just see what people want to see. Got the Corvus. That's your Cabal equivalent, except they're all bird-themed. The Windswept, which is going to be your Elixni equivalent. You got Surge and Ruin. Surge are going to be your Vex equivalent, and Ruin are going to be your Hive equivalent. Because this is what I do. I write equivalents. What do we think? Do we want to do one of these? Is any particular faction call to you? Probably shouldn't have closed it. What do we think? If we did Corvus, it's military stuff. If it's Windswept, it's, piratey, sneaky, kind of people. Surge, strange tech sort of thing going on. Weird tech problems. Ruin, more like scary hordes of enemies, monstrous foes, that sort of stuff. A big part of it just, I guess, depends on like what we mean by return, what is returning, and everything like that. Here's what I like. Surge sounds cool. I agree. I want to do Surge, and I want to do this. I want to do this one. I want to do a long thought abandoned research lab has like woken up. Why is it woken up? Because the Surge woke it up. Right? The Surge off doing their own weird tech thing where they are... What's the opposite of terraforming a planet? When you turn a planet into a machine, essentially, right? Is there a word for that? Do we have a good word for that? Well, they're up to no good, right? They're doing that. So here's like the basic premise. The Surge for reason, which maybe the beacons don't know right away, have discovered and booted up a research lab that we thought was abandoned, destroyed, lost a long-ass time ago. Go figure out what they want and what's going on with the lab. All right, that's a basic premise, right? That's the basic premise. At the start of the month, you would get something like this, but you'd get a little bit more detail, and it would be written more flavorfully. So, like, the idea is that you would get a prompt. Oops. Start of the month, you would get a flavorful prompt for the raid. Has the premise, outlines the enemy faction, maybe talks about the stakes involved. I think especially if this starts happening after Season 2 has begun, like Module 1 is all about planet and faction influence and invasions. So like quick peek up back into the Season 2 stuff. First module of the second season is going to be about like mapping out the system and having stability at the various like planets and places that we hold, and so then you can directly at least link it to this. So like this feels again like one of those like core modules. It feels so essential to the game now that I'm looking at it. So yeah, you get start of the month, flavorful prompt. Here's what's going on. Here's the problem. Here are the bad guys involved. Here's the stakes. Here's what happens. What happens if you succeed? And then so like this is like flavor, stability, faction stuff, and then loot. This is where the loot pool comes in. And then what happens if you fail? And that's like total fail. Like you just ignore the raid. And here's a question, like if you ignore the raid prompt, should this influence your star map still? Right? Like what if you just, I mean, if you have no interest in any of this stuff, then obviously it shouldn't. But if you're like regularly doing some of the raid stuff and then you just don't do the raid for a month, is it interesting to have that have a consequence to your ongoing light campaign anyway? What's the star map? The star map is a very loose premise that I have up here for Module 1. So Module 1 for Season 2 is going to be, it's going to map out, I need to hire somebody who can actually make this look good, map out the locations in the system, so planets and moons and stuff like that, where like strikes take place, and like map out factions and clocks of stability, essentially, for each of those locations, so that at the start of a strike, the GM can be like, look, this is the place that's being, like, this is where the strike is. Here's the current stability level of that planet in terms of, like, how often it's been hit by the enemy, what factions are involved. And this map was especially interesting when it was linked up to this idea of the season pass, where in strikes, where, like, once a week GMs would roll up 3 strikes, for example. This was just, that's an arbitrary number, but, like, a GM could roll up 3 strikes and say, like, all right, here are the 3 locations on the star map that are being invaded right now. Which one are you going to choose? It's kind of like in Band of Blades, which I'm going to write down because I'm realizing that. It's kind of like in Band of Blades when you generate the missions and you know you're going to fail one. You get to choose to do one, like, that you're actively going to do, and then one that you, like, can get, like, a tertiary success. Like, you just roll and see if there's an outcome. Kind of already, yeah. MV, I feel like you'd be very good at making this map. So that's the idea of, like, the star map and everything. And so each planet or moon has these levels of threats, has factions on it that are specific to that, or, like, maybe, like, you see this faction on these 3 planets, and so every time you help on those 3 planets, it helps those people, and it helps you fill up faction clocks, which gets you cool rewards. Anyway, so the question then is, like, if Light Live is not associated with the season pass, but you're still doing, like, the star map and everything, is it an interesting idea that if you ignore the raid, it still affects the map? I don't know. I'll probably just let tables decide that, right? That's my go-to response to most things, is, like, as a table, talk to each other and figure out what you want to do, rather than me dictating, like, this is how you have to do it. I don't like doing that. Okay, so what happens if you fail is not also just, like, totally ignoring the raid, but, like, what if you miss a week, which is, like, you know, it's a leg of the raid, one of the strikes. Like, what happens if you just don't do it? Or you fail it. Like, you could fail in this game. Light is way harder than the now dead game Frame. Light is hard because it's much more resource management. Like, you can't just assume you're gonna run in and win every fight, at least early on with your beacons. I've learned this through play, that you have to be careful, which is why I when I wrote Fuel, I added that well element to it, because, boy, playing Light a few times without having that, it felt extremely lethal and dangerous. All that to say is that you can fail in Light, and I think that's interesting. And so what happens if you fail? I don't know yet. That's something to consider, though. So, and that those stakes should be laid out at the beginning of the month. Beginning of the month, here's what happens if you succeed. Here's what happens when you fail in X number of different ways. Do you accept the challenge, right? And then ideally, the players all go, that sounds rad, can't wait to go take care of this raid. Or, you know what? That doesn't sound like the thing that we want to do this month. Like, we're going to skip this one. We're going to let some other beacons take care of this problem. And cool, then you don't have to worry about it. And if it's just like the thing that you know you're getting once a month, it just means that month you don't care. And that's fine, right? Like, when new season pass stuff comes out in Destiny, I don't like all of it, right? I don't engage with all of it. I don't engage with, like, Crucible shit. I hate the Crucible. So I don't care what Bungie puts in the Crucible every month. I don't engage with it. But that's just me, right? And so same thing could happen here, where folks are like, you know what, this raid just doesn't sound like it's our jam. Way too many jumping puzzles, which, you know, that's for people to... That's a very good point. No, yeah, Bungie doesn't give a shit either about Crucible. Way too many jumping puzzles, or not enough jumping puzzles, right? Whatever thing that you are like, this raid isn't for us, you can skip it. So stake as an ultimate thing, like stakes are lower with this model than the season pass, because like skipping a month as players is not the end of the world. Plus you didn't pay extra, right? Like, you know that every month you're going to get some cool stuff, and sometimes it hits for you and sometimes it doesn't hit for you, and that's fine, right? Like, I have a Netflix season or a Netflix subscription. Some months new stuff comes on and I'm really excited. Other months nothing happens, and that's what subscriptions are, I guess, right? So, okay. Obviously jumping puzzles are a big must. So what have we got so far in terms of making a raid? We have the premise of a premise. You have a premise. It's got a theme. I like this idea of having a theme. I think that's really cool. I love MV's return theme in particular for this one. A faction. Boom. You get a flavorful prompt. And you care now, right? It's not just some like quick text on the screen. Like it's like it'd be cool if it was written up. It'd be cool if it was written up in a stylized briefing format of some kind, right? Like if somebody could help me make an interesting template that could be used that looks like a fancy, slightly sci-fi briefing folder or, vid screen thing that your beacons would have projected to you so that you knew what task you had to do, or what the big problem was. You get it, it looks cool, and you're like, all right, let's do this thing. Before the first strike, before the strikes begin, you need to generate a loot pool, which should be advertised in some ways to the players. You want to, ideally the prompt on its own is enough for people to be like, this sounds fun, I can't wait to do this raid. But it's a looter shooter inspired RPG. We want the numbers to go up. We want the loot, right? So, Bungie doesn't just tell you how cool this raid is. They show you the badass gun you're going to get if you complete the raid, right? Or the raid armor or whatever. This means this is probably attached to that cool briefing. That you'll have this thing that says look, let's be real, beacons. You're not doing this out of the kindness of your heart. You're doing it because you're going to get a cool thing at the end. Here are some cool things that you could get at the end of the raid. Or at the end of each strike in the raid. So we generate a loot pool. A loot pool means you want, I'll say at least, but probably just one thing for each strike in the raid. So if there are 4 strikes, you need 4 items. Plus a bonus. A thing that if you do the whole ass thing, if you do the whole raid, you get a cool extra bonus item. That's the premise. Okay. So what does a loot pool mean? What is loot in Light, right? It's guns, right? So it could be new weapon types that aren't involved. Tags, obviously, I think this is probably the money maker right here is unique tags. Just like exotic weapons, you have these tags that do very cool, interesting, special things that only weapons that have this tag, which is only this weapon in particular. That's I think that's the kind of the cool thing, maybe the very cool thing. Oh, you have some new tags in Foundation? Were they really? Fuck, I missed them. Oh, I love laser as a tag. Let's look at foundation. Only the enemies have them. Oh, MV, you monster. Where are the tags? Where am I missing them? Mega Ram. Laser. Nice. Yeah, so that's cool. That's a new tag right there, right? That's cool. And I like that you gave it to the enemy. That's a really fun idea. God, look how good Foundation is. If you haven't if you haven't picked up Foundation, like holy shit, this is so good. This is so good. Fuck. Um so yeah, like new tags I think are the sweetness. I think this is neat. Or you make like a specific badass gun that has like a very specific set of tags that make it either like super powerful or really unique or strange, right? Like, oh wow, I never expected a rocket launcher to behave this way, right? Or what an interesting way for a sniper rifle to work. It shoots like explosive rounds or something, right? So you do something that makes a very specific badass gun. We make some interesting tags, maybe some new weapon types if there aren't. If we come up with some new ones, because certainly not all of the weapon types that there could be are in the game. That's something to consider. I don't know. Do I eventually just put like melee weapons in, even though Destiny doesn't have it? Because I had a really cool system in Frame for how to use this. Steal from Frame. I had a cool system for how to do melee weapons in Frame, so maybe I'll just steal from my own game. Because Destiny's got swords, right? It's got the swords, which are they're in the heavy slot. And then all like classes have a melee power. But that's different. Like the melee power, that's a thing that's already in the character sheet. But like a melee weapon could be cool. Maybe. Something to consider in the future. So loot is guns, I think primarily. But it doesn't. I guess. I'm gonna leave a note here for myself. Like, it doesn't have to be like a full gun. It could just be the tag. I have no idea what that means, like in fiction. But like you could just like kick open the loot chest at the end and like there's the laser tag in there. And you now have it. You can just slap it onto one of your weapons. So it's not like there's a gun in there with the laser tag, but you can just be like, we have learned the tech of laser and can apply it to a weapon now. Thing to consider about the loot pool to consider. Everyone gets the same thing? Always guaranteed to get it? In Fuel, which is the most recent thing that I released for Light, there's this element of a loot table that you roll on at the end of the strike. And it basically means, if you happen to roll lucky on that loot table, you're going to get something cool. Most of the time, you're going to get just like engrams that can be turned into weapons, like random weapons that you can trash and then like eventually make your own stuff. But there's this thing written in that you could repeat strikes, and then if you repeat strikes, you increase the odds that you roll high on the loot table, which means you now increase the odds that you get the thing. So the question then is that something that's involved in the raids. I don't know, right? Like, I feel like you want a thing for sure at the end of raid stuff. At least at the very end, you want like a thing, if not a set of things. So, so what you could do, God, is this shitty? I don't know. This might not be good. Tokens, right? Like the idea of you get raid tokens, you get them at the end of each strike. Like, they're kind of like the equivalent of engrams. Earn at least one at the end, plus more if you do X, Y, and Z, right? Like, then you can have modifiers at the start of each strike that says, like, pardon me, if you punch to death 5 enemies, you're going to get an extra token at the end of this strike. Then you're not getting loot every week. Instead, you earn and pile up tokens that transform into the loot pool at the end of the raid. Meaning, last strike, put tokens in the shop. There's tokens in the shopkeeper. Where's my light third party? Where's the shopkeeper? Everybody's just beat. This is the danger of running a jam. Is everybody makes everything before you can. This is awesome. Okay, cool. So let's take a look here. Oh right. The tokens of 3 every time you finish a strike. Right. This is here. And then there's, oh my god, I forgot about all these weapons. These weapons are so good. Look at this. Go buy this module too. Go buy the shopkeeper. It's so good. Like, it's worth it just for these weapons alone. Holy shit, these are like good weapons. And like exactly what I was saying in terms of coming up. I don't need to do anything, right? Like maybe what I should do is just crowdfund money so that I can pay people to, I don't know. Like, I want to pay people to do this because you all have already done such a fantastic job with it, right? Fuck, this is good. But yeah, exactly it. Like, cool-ass tags like periodic table. Look at this tag. You select the element type before the shot. That's awesome. Mend, like you heal folks up. Lux. Yeah, is this like the, what's it, Luna, right? Hand cannon, right? I think so, right? That's the idea. These are very good. Yes, exactly. So, yeah, here's this idea of tokens. So here we go. We've got like an idea of tokens existing. Shopkeepers handled it. I'm going to leave myself a note here. Obviously, go look more closely at Shopkeeper. Gotta do that. But that's very good, right? Like, so the premise makes sense. It's one that exists in video games. It exists in a light module already. And then at the last strike, you can like turn in your tokens for stuff from the loot pool. Which like in the shopkeeper is like this is Zur, right? We're getting our tentacle faced merchant fix here with the shopkeeper. Fuck, look at all these good tags. Look at all these very good tags. Yeah, so like Zur comes up with the daily offerings here, and then like you can turn in your tokens for whatever Zur is offering at that time. Ooh, this is exciting. It's exciting that people have already come up with these things because they're good, right? They're good ideas. These are very good ideas. I love this. This is good. Excellent. So I'm gonna I don't know, put that in yellow. Consider it, maybe. But that's all in consideration to this point here, which is everybody get the same thing at the end of every strike? Like, is that exciting? If like we all have the same gun, that might not be exciting, right? Like, how fun is it if we all literally use the same stuff? Not, right? It's not fun. Or it's not as fun as it could be with, like, we're all walking in with our new badass stuff. So I think the idea of randomizing it in some way or allowing customization in what you choose through tokens is helpful. So either, like, randomization to fix this, or control via tokens. Something like that. That makes sense to me so far. Okay. Tags allowed for some hero weapon stuff, which, yeah, right? Like, God, look at these tags. Look at these tags. Like, some of them are, they're very powerful, and then, like they're just, like, mechanically very good stuff. Like, electric jumps to the next target. That's very cool. But then, like, there's ping. I just love this as a tag. The weapon has a distinctive sound on firing. That's also, like, a cool-ass tag. And, you know, as we've discussed earlier at the very beginning of this, the end game isn't necessarily having the most powerful stuff. It's having, like, the most distinctly cool stuff, meaning, like, looking cool, sounding cool when we use our weapons. So, like, ping is a great tag. Ping is a very good tag. Okay. So, where are we? We're all over the place. We are making the raid. We have the premise. We got the faction. We have a theme. Start of the month. Flavorful prompt. Here's what's going to happen. We have not established at all the stakes or the failure stuff. Again, we won't do that unless it feels like this is definitely a direction we're going to go. We have a sense of succeeding being something about loot pools, but also being linked up to things like the faction star map stuff that we were seeing in season 2, like the first thing that comes out of season 2. So that makes sense to me. Obviously there's more, right? There's, like, again, armor, ornaments, fashion stuff, ships, purely flavorful things, right? Still cool stuff that you can get, and then anything else that eventually gets added via season pass stuff, right? Like, now, armor and casts are things that are in the game now that weren't in the game in the beginning. So, like, armor could be a thing in the loot pool, or, like, a refinement to your cast could be in the loot pool now because it's in the game now. Okay. Loot. So that's that. We have not fully built a loot pool, but that's fine. And then, you know, along with the briefing, so there's, like, general briefing, like, here's the problem, do you accept? Is then the briefing for Strike 1. Strike 1 then is all about, like, establishing the raid, sets the scene, shows the enemy, you get a glimpse of the major threat, and then ends with the beacons establishing some sort of foothold at the location where the raid is going to be. That's like the basic premise. Like, show up to the location. You're probably going to have to clear out some bad guys in the beginning when you get there. Figure out like an initial idea of what's going on. Touch base, connect in, and then that's strike one. We're getting glimpses and tastes and samples of what is going to happen throughout the raid, and then the remaining strikes do it. So strikes 2 through 4, let's do 2 through 3, are like the mid strike. So this is like continuous challenges, reveal more of the big threat, new obstacles, aka here's our jumping puzzles. We put our jumping puzzles somewhere in like strikes 2 to 3. Put in the weird stuff, put in the new stuff, new obstacles, new enemy, maybe something like that. So strike 1 is familiar in like the beacons aren't going to be thrown into something that they're totally unexpecting, but a new environment maybe. And then strikes 2 through 3, weird stuff, strange stuff, figuring it out. Maybe like this is where you need to do some legwork in order to actually beat the raid, right? If you learn about some weakness in the boss or sequence that must be followed to do blank, right? Like, this is where you do that stuff. You do all of that stuff so that strike 4, final strike, is like the true finale of the whole thing. And this is where like the stakes are clear and at their highest, right? Like, couldn't be higher. Now's the time to take care of the thing. And I like the idea of finale is harder or easier based on blank. I like this idea because if the strikes are kind of like woven together, then the idea is you're gonna have an easier time if you did X, Y, and Z in strikes 1 through 3, right? Like it's like optional secondary or hidden objectives that the GM can sprinkle through the raid experience, and the prompts are going to be at each of these things. Like, it's something to note here. Like where should I put this? All strikes will have a briefing. Secret loot chest. Writing it down somewhere. Secret loot chest. Just put it on the page because it's good. It's very good. It's got to go on the page. It's very good. All strikes will have some sort of briefing for the GM to read themselves and to the players, right? So just like they're going to get the debriefing, like the briefing doc on like, here's what you got to do. The GM is getting a thing that has more information about like, here's the enemies to use. Here's some hidden things you could sprinkle in, hidden / secondary objectives, all that good stuff, right? Things like that. So you're going to get one of these. The GM's going to get one of these all the time, with each briefing. And then the players are only going to be read or presented with a briefing that is relevant to the beacons and what they would currently know. So, yeah, then the finale rolls around and boom. Harder or easier based off of if you did this. It's harder if you, skip a week, right? If we just imagine that you didn't do strike 2, right? And you just jumped back in at strike 3, and it might be a little bit harder. Or if you failed at some objective, right, along the way, there could be like modifiers going on of some kind. Things to consider. And then, boom, boom, you did it. You win. Get your loot. Do the strikes influence each other? Yeah, like, I think that's what I want, is that I want it to feel like, let's just put it in its simplest form. Let's just call a raid right now a 4-room dungeon, and each strike is just a room in the dungeon. So you show up, and you clear the first room. It's just as an analogy. Strike 1 done. Whatever you do in that room, however you did, will influence what happens in the next room. I think that's what I want to happen. Is I want them to be strung together. This is like the big difference. God, I need to write this somewhere where it matters, where I'll notice it. The strikes, the outcome of the strikes influence one another, because that's not as much the case here with the season pass thing. Each strike is just its own. It's like a nightfall in Destiny, where it's like, this is just what you could work on this week. They don't necessarily link together as like a continuous cohesive story, but this is like every week is expanding on the story, so they do influence one another, unlike the season pass model. You can have in the beginning of the strike a choice. How was the previous strike completed? Good, medium, bad, and then have different options on how to run this based on that. And if you skip, just pick what you like with the group. Yeah, I like stuff like that. I like stuff where you could decide. It's kind of like in Blades. You can tell I love Blades, right? In Blades, when you do an engagement roll at the start of a job, and you like figure out all the positives and negatives that are going on for your crew before you jump into the job, and then you get to roll and just see how things are going. And that all is usually influenced by stuff that you did before. Something like that could be interesting, right? That could be interesting. And then boom, you get the loot. Ta-da! And you can, it's either like, again, random or tokens or something. You get the loot. Yeah, engagement roll is really good tech. All right, you get the loot. Ta-da! You did it. It's very exciting. And then you do it all over again. Question mark. That's the premise, right? That's the premise, is that you would do this. This would be repeated. Not this exact raid, but then you'd get a new raid the next month with some new loot to chase. Clover. She's upset about something. It's okay. It's okay. So that's the premise, right? You would just do this again every month if you wanted to. And that's the big thing, is like, it's if you wanted to. All of the light live stuff is like, that's the like the motto of the whole thing is do this if you want to do it. Like, just like any live service game, you don't have to do any of this stuff if you don't want. But I want to present the options for stuff, cool stuff to engage with either the new modules or the new whatever that's coming out, so that people feel like the game is supported and alive. And I think that's what I want it to feel. I want it to feel supported and alive. So this has been going on for like an hour now. So I think this is pretty good for today. We've got the brainstorm of just generally what a light live is and what a live game, why I want to do it. We talked about bots and stuff like that. Last time we talked about the season pass model. This time the raid model. And I think maybe then what I'll do on Thursday is really like compare and contrast these two and decide like which one feels better. Maybe that's what I'll do Thursday. I might do like Slayer's Almanac stuff on Thursday instead, because there's some really cool discussions about itch funding that is going on right now. And I think itch funding might be how I do Slayer's Almanac? Question mark? Maybe. So maybe I'll talk about that on Thursday. But that's the plan. I think that's it. I think we're done. I think that's the stream. Thanks so much, everybody who stopped by and watched, and thanks so much to folks in chat for excellent ideas, and please go support the shopkeeper module and the foundation module on itch. They're both so very good, both fantastic modules. Go buy them. They're worth it. They're great. Yeah, we'll chat again on Thursday. I'm planning on generally doing this Tuesdays and Thursdays. That way, it's not a huge commitment, and it's just a thing that I can look forward to doing twice a week. So that's the plan. That's the premise. Have a wonderful day, night, evening, morning, whatever it is you are. Have a great one.